Um, for me, it began when I was kind of exploring different careers, different pathways beyond my A levels. And I think what appealed to me to begin with was trying to use the skills I had from what I spent a lot of my childhood doing, which was performing, dance, ballet, and what I could bring from that to something new. So I actually went down the line of physiotherapy to start with. But then doors were open to me in terms of other professional, medical related careers, but working with people more. And occupational therapy was then explained to me, and it just actually made me think, I really want to be able to help people in that perspective. So then did the 3-year degree and went straight into it from there.
So how long have you been doing that?
21 years, just counting. 21 years. Yes, long time. Not continuously. Had a short break, but headed to London to start with. And I think what a lot of OTs do is they explore lots of different fields of practice to begin with at a basic grade level to really get an idea of what they might want to then specialise in, but also just to get an understanding of different client groups. And then specialised in neurological OT at the National Hospital for Neurology, Queen Square. And spent about 5 years there. Yes. Before going down the path of having a family and leaving London behind, having children, working locally, and then taking a career break due to some ill health, which actually gave me a different insight into being a patient, I guess, and understanding how when something changes in your life in terms of illness, what impact it can have, and having a bit more of an understanding, I guess, of what people go through and the impact it can have on them and their lives. And then when I was ready, I went back into it, but I actually went back into it as a neuro rehab assistant. So getting myself back into working with people again and supporting an occupational therapist with their treatment plan, which gave me a bit of confidence, I guess, as well, to I don't know, work with people, but just give me the confidence that I can do it. I know that I'll be able to get back into it, and the skills are still there. When did I first meet Chris? Well, I started working with Chris in terms of taking him to the gym, and we'd go out twice a week. I'd drive him to his local gym, local to home. And I guess what struck me about him was his motivation, I guess, was a big factor for Chris. Very driven individual, very clear about what he wanted to achieve. And that there was a respect for that. He had his vision in mind, and it was important to support him with that. I think one key element of what I did with him then was to make sure he felt that I was part of what he was doing. He didn't want me to be the therapist or the assistant who looked on. He wanted to pursue what he was doing alongside me, with me. So we were working out at the gym together. It wasn't just me helping Chris get to the gym to work out. It was, I'm on here, you're on here, let's do this together. Come on, let's work hard. If he wanted to listen to music, occasionally he'd say, I won't put my headphones on because it's not fair on you. That's fine, Chris, you go ahead and put your headphones on and listen to your music. You get in that zone. So it never felt right to sit in the background and let him get on with it for an hour. As a therapist, I guess I wouldn't have been involved week by week, month by month, year by year. But I think it comes down to an individual client. But I guess what is probably common to most individuals is that they don't want to feel different to anybody else in whatever environment they're in. So helping them to feel like they're fitting in and not standing out like a sore thumb. I think that's probably why it felt right. Yeah. I guess what probably surprised me about Chris in particular was that even though he was 2.5, 3 years down the line at the time, from my previous experience, I would be thinking that things start to sort of slow down. The gains that you're making in terms of rehabilitation, your focus might be very different, but I felt with Chris that he was constantly making gains. And I felt that was down to the motivation that he has, how driven he was, but also I think the support he had around him. So the therapy team, his family have been a major driver, I think, in his progress. His willingness to engage, the range of activities that were offered to him. And I guess with Chris's brain injury, he requires time, so repetition was so key. So by working with him week by week, consistently, you were allowing him to make changes, I guess, develop, move on, reevaluate. So at the stage when I met him, he was mobile, major, I guess, difficulties with balance. So walking outdoors for me felt like an anxiety to begin with, particularly going up and down stairs, using equipment in the gym. So we had to make sure that I was interacting with other professionals to be sure that we were keeping him safe, but at the same time letting him explore his potential. But I guess at that stage I did want to make sure I could attend whatever was possible that other therapists were doing, and attend sort of family meetings so that we all sat round and we would discuss progress together. And I think that way you can get an understanding of the goals and ambition, I guess, that the family may have on behalf of Chris. It was probably more apparent when I was working with him as an occupational therapist, where we sat down and met Chris once he was home and sort of re-evaluated where he was, and Denise particularly was very much part of that process. So she had the opportunity to identify what goals she thought she had for Chris, which were very much in line with Chris, but I guess Chris, as part of his brain injury and the process of settling at home, he was very much about feeling comfortable within the structure he's got and building from that. So being responsible for, say, doing jobs at home like making his bed or preparing meals, all were a continuation of what he was doing at rehab, and where he felt comfortable and happy to build on and work on and feel confident about. And I guess from the family perspective, Denise could bring in with more confidence, I guess, about what else she wanted Chris to be able to explore now that he was back home, but being mindful of what Chris feels ready to take on board. We're kind of only at the point now, I would say, where we're starting to look to the next 6 months, to the next year. So I think the first phase was very much about giving Chris the time to settle back in at home, establish his roles, his routine, his participation activities outside of home, to be able to work with a support worker, to have them present from first thing in the morning to last sort of early evening. So I guess one of my initial goals was to assist Chris to set up that structure and routine on a weekly basis. So we go through a process of timetable planning. Chris, I guess, when he left the rehab unit, was a little reluctant to take on board that timetable planning because he saw it as part of that stage of his life where rehabilitation was quite structured. He knew what he was doing. At 9 o'clock he'd be having physio, 10 o'clock he would be having speech therapy, then he'd have a rest. And so forth. And I guess for him, he wanted to come home and let go of some of that. So we had to sort of gently coerce him and advise him that perhaps to start with it would be worth having some structure, but that he was part of the consultation process, I guess, of working out what that was going to be week by week. So we would set an idea of what he valued as being essential to his weekly timetable. For him, the most important things were being able to play golf, going to the gym, and spending time with his family, and continuing with his therapy. So they were key things that needed to be there for him. And then we would add in all the extras, so that he was happy that there was enough flexibility but enough structure. And he will now tell you that he loves that aspect. It's important to him. It gives him a sense of control, and understanding of what he is and what he's doing. So that's one kind of goal we're working towards, is him being able to plan his week independently, or with as much minimal assistance as possible. The other goals he set himself for coming home is to be able to prepare sort of a breakfast, a lunch and a dinner for himself, or for himself and his mum, on a weekly basis. And he was working on that while he was in rehabilitation. So that's a continuation of that process, but it's a new environment. So he's had to learn how to cook and prepare meals within a new setup, new kitchen, understanding where things are kept, how certain tools work, how equipment works, how the oven works, that kind of thing. And I've been supporting him to look at how he sequences that process of preparing a meal. So we use written instructions that he is cued into with my support, to help him to collect everything he needs, items, ingredients, and then a method for carrying out that recipe, that meal, without having to do too many things at once.
Yes. Because
that would overthrow him and lead to failure, possibly. So it's about allowing him to succeed with a little bit of support. And again, repetition being key, without making errors, which enables him to then imprint those methods, and be more successful, and potentially be able to make those things independently.
It's really interesting, actually, Zoe, how, having had the two conversations before, how the dots are being joined up.
Yeah.
Chris has spoken a lot about food, and he's talked a lot about your how you've helped him.
Mm-hmm.
Because memory's an issue, isn't it, for him? Short-term memory, so remembering his turn at home on or off.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So we found a way, and actually we're going to progress this further. And I think with occupational therapy, we're always changing and always adapting the way we're working with an individual. Yeah. So for right now, we've been adapting recipes to make sure that they're each step is small and manageable for Chris, and it's a list of instructions that are put on top of on his cupboard, so it's right at his height, so he can cue into that easily and follow it through. But actually, I think the next stage will be he's a young gentleman who actually is pretty IT competent. Let's get it onto an iPad and allow him to manipulate recipes as he needs to, and access recipes and steps through that media rather than written instructions. So we've talked about the idea that meals are absolutely right. They are often about socialising, having interactions with people, whether it be romantic or whether just catching up with friends. And we have talked about, what does he feel he'd like to cook for a good friend? He's got a handful of very loyal friends, and he goes out with them every couple of weeks or so. I said, would you feel comfortable yet to try and cook for one other friend? He said, he's not ready for that. And I think with Chris, you respect that and you understand that. And he will get there when he feels ready to. But the moment he feels he's still building his confidence and coming to terms with sort of just being home and getting used to existing here, going out, he loves going out. Also, I guess, sort of with Chris, we've been thinking about, I mean, to give an example, Chris was going to a place called Thrive while he was in rehabilitation, which is a gardening project, and it fits the remit of sort of vocational rehabilitation. So thinking about what Chris did previously in his occupation and trying to bring elements into work rehabilitation for him, and he took that on board and was very keen to participate because he could see the benefits in terms of improving his fatigue levels, mental fatigue, physical fatigue, engaging in physical tasks that would challenge his balance, his fine motor skills, all sorts of sort of therapeutic benefits to going. And then he came home and actually has decided that that's not for him anymore. And what Chris will relate to is sort of that fine line between something that feels contrived and something that is real. So you can have contrived that still be meaningful, or you can have sort of just participation that feels completely sort of natural. And for him, for example, he will play chess with his family, he'll play a board game with his family. If it's sat around the meal, family's very important to him. But if he was to sit in here and use his spare time to play chess with his support worker, that's not the same. There's not the same level of interest and meaning to participating in that, because it feels like it's put on for the sake of engaging in something that's going to keep them occupied. So he has a kind of grasp of that, and I think that's the same thing that happened with Thrive. It had its purpose and he enjoyed going and it did a lot for him, but he's kind of closed the door on that chapter, along with his inpatient sort of rehabilitation. It served its purpose then, but it's not so meaningful to me anymore. So it's being, again, aware of those boundaries. At the same time, Chris is not ready to explore any other work option, and Chris has a phrase quite often of no way. You know, that's his way of saying not interested, no way. And I guess the idea of the occupational therapist being aware of those boundaries is sometimes at the right time they might need to be pushed. And I think as a team we feel for now that's okay. He's got enough that he's contending with, from just coming to terms with his normal routine, all the activities he's doing in the community. To explore something new for him right now is just too much. But we have to monitor about the time, when the time is right, to perhaps open up new doorways.
Yeah, it's the comfort zone thing, is it?
Absolutely, yeah. And like with Thrive, it was a no way to begin with, and yet he gained so much from it. But it's finding the right way in and at the right time. I guess the main focus for sort of Chris coming home was about him being safe to do so and having the environment ready for him to live sort of independently but with support. I guess for Chris, he was been ready for quite some time. I think he had more rehabilitation than was probably within that acute setting or inpatient setting, more than what he probably, I can't say needed to either, because actually he continued to gain. But there's always a risk, I guess, of becoming slightly institutionalised, especially if someone, I guess, has a brain injury and can become quite fixed in their ways and their routines. So I think there was a concern about how he would adapt to coming home. I think what surprised us was that he actually has adapted incredibly well. Again, I think that's down to the support he's had around him from his family, and I guess a fairly seamless therapy service. He has and he continues to surpass himself in terms of our expectations of him, and I'm sure there are several elements to that. I think one is his motivation and his drive, and his, I guess, his stubbornness to some extent. He will push through and push on with what he wants to achieve. I guess I personally feel a big element of it has been the support he's had around him, a very committed, supportive family who have been able to give him access to participating in things that have allowed him to continue to develop his skills, like his grandpappy taking him golf 2-3 times a week. That's not always available to people. You know, they don't always have that support, therefore don't have those opportunities. I mean, Chris has achieved amazing things since he's been home. Again, I guess as partly because he's been put in situations where he's faced challenges and he's got on and he's given them a go, such as going on the treadmill at the gym. Okay, that wasn't part of the therapy plan, but he's achieved it, and now they're going to review that, and potentially he'll be doing that more. I mean, there's so many different elements. I mean, he's just recently achieved, and this is very much his own goal off his own back, moving from the driving range to the golf course. He should be very proud of that. That's an amazing achievement. That's a goal he's been working on tirelessly and enjoying working on it since he was able to get out on the driving range again. For him, he had it in his head he needed to be able to strike the ball straight, get it to 200, 250 yards. He achieved it, and now he's back. You know, he's literally within the last week exploring, getting back on the golf course. Obviously, he's going away, so for him, that's a driver. And there's a big family competition, and there's a cup at stake, and so all these little drivers are making him move on and want to achieve. Open, I guess, willing to take on board advice and intervention that keeps coming his way. He's so positive. I mean, part of that is down to the brain injury itself. He doesn't experience feeling low. He feels frustrated, and his mum is a great avenue for that, in terms of mum will always listen, and he knows that he can always go to mum and talk through his worries. I think when he first came home and he had that sort of transition phase, he did experience increased frustration, because he had to take on board having somebody new as in part of his life, as sort of Monday to Friday, morning to evening, and that's a relationship that kind of get on with it from day one. But he's managed that well. But yeah, he doesn't experience feeling low, doesn't cry, and in many ways that's a real plus, because it keeps him buoyant, it keeps him bright, it keeps him pushing on, wanting to achieve it more and more. They're kind of on two levels, because day to day he's okay with what he's achieving and what he's developing, and he's still motivated to drive forward. On another level, he will bring up from time to time that one day he'll be able to run again. That's a long-term goal, and who's to say that's wrong? You know, maybe one day he will, but in the capacity that he used to do, which might have been running from here to the gym, so a mile perhaps, or half a mile. Probably not a long-term goal, but has been his belief from time to time, that he'll be better when he can do that. And I think things like that you can ruminate on. You know, it can be, I'll get there, and then it becomes difficult to reason through other things, because that's not where he's heading. But with support and time and experience in different things, he does accept that isn't the case. So that has been a challenge, and it probably is an ongoing challenge, but I don't think it's as much of a challenge now as it was perhaps earlier on. As well as believing he would one day be financially very well off. because of course he suffered an injury that was a result of an accident at work, and what comes with that is a compensation claim. And again, that's become a fixed idea in his head that one day perhaps he will be a wealthy man. And that's something that the family have had to support him with, to understand that it's not going to happen in that way. And he will often share his thanks with people, sort of using that perhaps he'll be able to help them one day. So they've been a couple of big challenges. He's got some real strength to his memory, so his ability to remember faces and names is phenomenal. He's very good at numbers, so he's always remembered the door codes when he was coming out of therapy, and he has no problem remembering his PIN for his card, phone numbers, that kind of thing. Names, phenomenal, far better than I am, very strong, and he gets a lot from sharing that with the people he meets. When he can remember the name, he'll greet them and use their name as he feels good about that. Absolutely, and we keep that at the forefront really, in terms of where that past could be taken forward, how he might be able to use those skills or that passion again in the future. We're not very open at the moment. So I mean, there's obviously they're actually doing quite a lot in the garden of their home to encourage and support Chris, I guess, for the family as well, but to create some raised beds, to create an environment that's easy for Chris to access, to entice him out there and to engage in things that he actually might get enjoyment from. We had a conversation about, because he was involved in gardening when he was at the rehab unit. He was obviously been involved in gardening when he was at Thrive, the gardening project, and we talked recently about the wastage he had from buying fresh herbs because he was just cooking for one. They don't last very long. What about doing a little herb garden? But again, for Chris, it's not right now. But you just have to keep planting those little seeds, and then maybe, not literally, but the thoughts, and that maybe one day you'll be ready to do that. I think we're spoilt in this scenario. I'm spoilt in this scenario because Chris's family have been on board for a while now and had such good therapy support, so they have a good understanding of brain injury. But I guess the key is education, so it's giving them that support and advice on how brain injury can affect an individual, and time that they need to take that on board. And I guess taking feedback, so making sure that you're not giving too much too soon, or just being able to, I guess that's the collaborative rapport building process, is giving but also seeing what's coming back so that you can judge. Well, I mean, within this setting, Denise is here an awful lot, so we will always have discussions every time I see Chris about the progress he's made or things that have happened during that week, and feedback exactly what we're doing in therapy. And when the time is right, it's also useful, so particularly as an occupational therapist, we're working on activities specifically, is to make sure that we're doing those sessions as appropriate with families, carers, so that they understand what we're working on and how to support the client, the individual as well. I guess another challenge is allowing that time, sort of therapist-client rapport and space. I guess particularly in this situation, Denise is here a lot, but it's allowing Chris to have that independence to engage in the therapeutic relationship separate from Denise. So that has to be a fine balance. It's very important to involve the family, but equally, for someone like Chris, he is his own individual and needs the opportunity to participate as himself. She's so able. Denise is so able, so competent, amazing, and such an advocate for Chris. And all those are very, very valuable qualities to bring for Chris. But yes, it's just being aware that Chris needs his own presence. Yeah. It kind of shows what a complex task shopping can be, particularly working with someone with a brain injury. There are so many components to it. It's physical, it's cognitive, it's psychosocial. There's a lot to it. So there are several elements we're kind of working on within that task, and it's about consistency. It's about giving for Chris, we're at a level where we are using one store that is very familiar to him before we consider moving on to generalising that between stores, whether it ever will. So for him, he has a supermarket layout plan, so he is able to visualise the whole supermarket on a piece of paper, and written on that piece of paper is all the products he might find, or the categories of products he would find in a particular aisle, and those aisles are labelled to help Chris organise the route he's going to take through the supermarket, and help with his planning of doing that. So as part of the process for shopping, he has to write his list, and we try to make sure that that list is written using that layout so that he can kind of formalise a list that allows him to weave up and down the aisles of the store rather than jumping from 1 to 5 to 10. Because actually you and I, when we go to the supermarket, we know in our head roughly where things are, and we'll go and get a certain vegetable and we'll know that the fruit is also there, so if we need fruit we'll go and get that while we're there. That's quite a complex thought process, potentially for someone with a brain injury. So he goes for the shopping list that is already created in an order. Then he has to remember to do things when he gets there, like scan my Waitrose card so that he's got his scanner ready. And then the other key elements that we're working on is him being able to remember to check best before dates, so that he's got responsibility for checking that things are going to last for that week. It's all about the week that he's working in. And then on top of that, it is finding products on the shelf. So he's moved from not being able to scan across an aisle and find exactly what the product is he needs, to actually once he's in the right aisle, he can pretty much find what he needs. So he has progressed from that point of view, and I think that's through repetition and familiarity and consistency. He's become familiar with what is where in the supermarket, which we all do, but for Chris that has taken a length of time in one very familiar store to achieve. So now he doesn't need to use brain space so much to actually locate items within an aisle. He now needs to work towards understanding which aisle the items will be in. But we've set up a structure for him to be able to do that. And then also it's the checkout. So it's his independence of the checkout. And there are several stages to checking out, especially when you have a scanner. So he's got to scan it, he's got to press continue, and then there are several different buttons he's got to press on the screen before he's able to put his card in and actually pay. And he's moved from needing support for the whole process to just needing an initial prompt. So small steps, but significant steps for him. So the goals we've currently set for him are around the number of prompts he requires while he's going around the supermarket. And interestingly, for some time his aim was to, well, it still is, to be independent, to go around the supermarket independently, and his support worker can sit and wait for him and have a coffee and purely drive him there and bring him home. And that's still true. He does want to be independent, but he doesn't want to be on his own because social contact is important to Chris. So he doesn't want to be left to get on with his shopping. He wants someone with him. So although he will be aiming towards requiring no prompts regarding his shopping, he will still have someone with him because he wants a companion. It's going to be, I think, a significant amount of time still working on those activities of daily living that he's currently working on. Embedding, absolutely, yes. He's going to need a lot of time before those behaviours become solid and abilities in those activities become well connected. Projects that we're looking towards the future are a little bit more financial control, so managing a weekly budget. So he's starting that in terms of he's identifying roughly what he thinks his weekly shop will cost when he's written his list. So it's understanding what he thinks that will be. And he's now going to the cash machine, which is something Denise wanted him to do, to get a mini statement. So he's got a sense of what's in his account, and to ask Mum if it needs replenishing. So particularly for Chris, who ruminates on the idea that one day he might have a lot of money, it's kind of giving a sense of actually there is a finite budget rather than it just being endlessly topped up. And to also, he has a social budget, which is cash. So it's being aware of how much he has per week. And then to introduce the idea of perhaps saving. So saving for something he might want in particular. And we've spent some time trying to think about downtime for Chris, because downtime is important in terms of fatigue levels, taking some time to mentally recover or physically recover. But he's struggling with that being nothing but lying on his bed. So you can do about 10 minutes lying, listening to music or nothing. But there is other downtime that he struggles to know what to do with. And we are starting to explore whether he wants to go back to doing things like playing the Xbox or listening to music, watching films. But none of those he's particularly taken on board yet. But maybe it's the idea of saving for a game, for example, that he can then use in his downtime. So as a starting point for downtime, the neuropsychologist is looking towards visualization as a sort of mindfulness strategy to help him, obviously, to help him focus his mind on something and not sort of ruminate on things that are less positive for him, but equally not to overwhelm him with activity during those periods of quiet time. And then the other area we've got in the back of mind and we've been talking on and off to Chris about for a while is vocational rehab. So it's looking at sort of developing a work role. Chris's attitude at the moment is if I don't need to, I won't. But as a long-term goal, I think that's something that we'll, when the time is right, try to open the door up in Southern Avenue for him, because I think eventually he will reach a point where he needs more to his existence than what he's currently got. And actually he's very happy right now, and he's working so hard, and he's got a lot of therapeutic intervention still. But I think there will come a time when we can try to open up doorways for him. And I have on and off said that school that my children go to, they've got an amazing team of groundsmen who do phenomenal jobs around the grounds. You know, this. So I'm just thinking about linking into what Chris used to do in the past. So many opportunities potentially there for him, but at the moment that's not something he wants to explore. Chris is very keen not to be defined by his disability, absolutely. There are things that have been introduced that he has said, no way, absolutely, I'm not interested. So that's been from sort of supporting him physically, so sort of rails to get in and out of the house, and he currently has a trolley to help him transport food. There those have been difficult items for him to take on board, and he's already decided doesn't need those anymore, doesn't want to be seen as disabled. Equally, Chris knows he's not, kind of knows he's not right yet. So he does have an awareness, and I guess it goes back to when we were talking about him having a friend over for dinner. For him, I haven't delved into it too much, but I wonder about his how he looks at his space here. Does it define him, or does it define him as still recovering? It's kind of work in progress, I guess. I guess a lot of his therapy still takes place here. His meal preparation, his doing things like bed making, laundry tasks. So whether for him, he has basically said that it wouldn't be right for me to bring my friends back here. It's not right yet, because they know I'm still trying to get better. So he's still on that journey of recovery. Rightly so. We know he's still on a journey of recovery, but it's a journey that's not going to come to an end in terms of, he'll always have needs. There are always going to be people that are going to have to support him. Oh, it means a lot. I guess it does mean a lot. I think we facilitate. I mean, he's doing the work, and we're a facilitator, as I guess his family are. I think quite often as an OT, well, I feel as an OT, you can do the smallest thing sometimes, and it makes a massive impact on an individual. It's a collaborative process, and he's very much at the centre of it, and he is the one who's doing the hard work. And my job is made easy by the fact he is so motivated, determined. He can identify his own goals, and his family provide an awful lot. So it's a pleasure to work with Chris and his family. And I'm sort of, I guess, guiding, but I'm not alone. We're a therapy team. He's got a great team around him, so we're working together to sort of guide the direction he wants to go. I mean, it's just got a wealth of opportunities. Your people skills have to be strong. You've got to be a people person, which anyone has the potential to be. You have to have empathy, understanding, you've got to be a good listener. And I guess it's exciting because you're part of somebody else's journey. You're influencing the path they're taking, and you can work in so many different fields. Brain injury, neurological rehab is just a portion of that. You can work on so many different activities. You could be working on helping someone to feed themselves, through to, I don't know, relearning to ride a horse again, or you can work with someone who's 3 years old to someone who's 90 odd. Yeah, very diverse. I work with a lot of different health professionals, social professionals, millions of different environments you can be in, home, work, school, hospitals. It's a very supportive culture to work in. It has such strong values and ethos that is very clearly identified and very much fits with the way I have always worked as an OT. It's about the whole individual, and it's underpinned very strongly by a model and approach to practice, so it gives you the confidence. It's a good foundation for what you're doing, and good support. So if you need any advice, it's there. And I guess the confidence that Krysalis has good relationships with, I don't know what to call them, providers of, resources of clients, etc., other professionals. Got good relationships. Never take anything for granted. Value life and opportunities. You never know what might happen. Throughout work as an occupational therapist, you value that everyone is an individual, no matter what you see on the outside. And actually, you can have two individuals with the same illness or event happen to them, but the outcome or that journey is going to be so very different because that individual is unique. So there's no prescription. It is all about understanding each individual and adapting. For me, it's really difficult to put in a nutshell. I guess having taken time out for myself and understanding what, I think particularly when you start to get involved in needing services, you understand how chaotic that can be for someone, I guess just an awareness that there's so much going on in someone's life. Occupational therapy is a small part of that, a significant part of it, but there's so much else that's going on for somebody, and not to take that for granted. And you have to, I guess when I decided to step away from it, it was because I felt I couldn't take the kind of work on as well as dealing with what I was managing with, to deal with. I had my own illness to work through, and to then be able to take on the occupational therapy work as well was too much, and I acknowledged that and stepped back and came back when I was ready and knew that I was in a good place to be able to work with others again. Yeah. I think it must have been the complexity of Neuro-OT. I took a break from Neuro-OT after I had children, so I worked in orthopaedics. And you still, every client is different, and you still have got to take that individual and their needs into account, a little bit more prescriptive. So Neuro-OT, I think it's because every aspect, or particularly with a head injury, any aspect can be affected. Physically, cognitively, psychologically, all has an impact, yes. I think it is the complexity. Yes, sometimes it's difficult to untangle like a symptom. Say someone has difficulty concentrating. That it could be a cognitive issue, but it could be a psychological issue. It could be a fatigue issue. So many different things can impact on one small symptom, and it's understanding what is that cause. I think it is that it's the variety. It's the strange enough, it's probably the excitement of it being so different with every client you work with. It never gets boring. And you never know what to expect, and your treatment approach and pathway is different every time, and you're constantly changing the way you're working with someone, adapting, and it's a challenge, I think, and being so holistic in your approach. It really is about the whole person and the environment they exist within, from a physical perspective and a social perspective. Yeah.